Hi everyone, it's Dianna with Living on the Fault Lines, my corner of the universe and internet where I'm talking about healing after loss, including the tragic loss of suicide. And the reason I'm talking about it is that back in 2010, I found myself in the aftermath when my husband took his life. And quite frankly, as the mother of 3 young children, I was terrified because there's a very big stigma and taboo surrounding suicide. And not many people are talking about it. So I've spent the last 4 years talking and writing to different people and kind of learning about what's going on here. And I have been just trying to introduce some different energy into this corner. I'm really excited today to have Marti Murphy with me. Marti is one of only 7 certified master abundance coaches, a certified EFT practitioner, and former corporate captive. She's the host of the EFT Radio Show, Leave the Job You Hate for the Work You Love. She specializes in assisting clients into moving into meaningful work and creating a life they love. Hi, Marti. How are you?
Hi, Diana. I'm great. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited, and I'm so appreciative. I know that you found me through an interview I did with Entheos with Dina Proctor. Right?
Yes, it was fabulous. Really touched me.
Well, and that is, I love bringing people in who kind of have a resonance with the work and who, maybe have had experience with suicide, which I think is important. And I would love it if you would just tell people a little bit about your background and, the EFT work that you do. I don't know that everybody's heard about emotional freedom technique or tapping, so maybe we can just kind of start there and then move into how it can help somebody who is in the aftermath.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, my quick story is I love the Thoreau saying most men live lives of quiet desperation and die with their song still in them, and that was me. I was walking through life quietly desperate. It was never like horrible, but it was never really good. And I had an eating disorder early in life for a lot of reasons with my family upbringing. I had a mom, alcoholic mother who I was really, working through stuff, and a rageaholic father who it turns out had post-traumatic stress. So I was dealing with all of that and navigating through dealing with an alcoholic parent who seemed pretty hopeless in the desire to help herself. So all of that really added into my sense of despair, and I didn't know what to do with that. I had joined a 12-step group and got help that I, as much as I could, but I found myself caught in what I call the try and fail cycle. So I'd find that next thing that I thought was like, oh, this is a thing, it's really going to set me free. And I would go into it just full bore. And the next thing I know, within 2-3 weeks tops, I was falling on my face, just accumulating more evidence that there was something wrong with me, that I just didn't have what it took to move myself forward. And I really was building up despair. Yet I kept trying, and I feel that trying piece of me was like the light in me that knew that there was more, but just couldn't seem to get through the fog that was in the way of it. And it was 2014, I was like quietly desperate. Actually, it was 2012, sorry. And I was thinking about, God, here I am. Another year has come to a close on New Year's Eve, and I'm stuck. I'm no better off than I was, and I was really falling into despair. So I just threw in the towel, and I said, if there's something out there that can really help me move forward, then please send it my way. And if there's not, I just want peace with this extremely mediocre life, because that's how I felt. And shortly thereafter, I listened to a summit. I found my mentor, and I found tapping. And I couldn't believe it. I just started doing it. I really didn't know a whole lot about it, but it started to work. And I started to feel better and get traction, and all this emotion that had really, come down on me was starting to free me up. And the biggest epiphany that I had was, oh, wow, the only thing that's wrong with me is I downloaded limiting beliefs that get in my way, that would throw me in despair and throw me into places that I really didn't want to go, but seemed helpless to stop myself from doing. So as I freed that up, it really kind of has changed my life tremendously and continues to do so. And now I have a tool that no matter what I face, I know I have a way to navigate through it, where before I felt really hopeless. And yeah.
So tapping, for people who don't know what it is, I discovered it, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. A friend of mine was going through a really difficult divorce. And I remember one day she just started, doing this strange thing. And I asked her what it was, and she said tapping. And then I didn't encounter it really again until my own work in therapy. My energy therapist uses it quite a lot. So how does it work? I mean, you have, what I've been told, is it works on the meridians on the body. But can you just kind of explain? Because one of the things I think is confusing about tapping for people is you talk about the negative stuff, and this idea of, and someone explained it to me that it's kind of like when you highlight text on a computer. You highlight it first and then you delete it, which I thought was an interesting way to look at it. But how is that working for somebody? When you're saying these negative thoughts and you're tapping, just so people can understand.
Yeah, what you touched on, it melds acupuncture and modern day psychology. It's all about tapping on meridian points. So instead of using needles, we tap. And the idea is that this meridian system is connected into the brain, and it helps with the fight or flight response that we get when we have a negative emotion. So when we have an emotion that's potent and comes up, when we tap, and that's why we state the negative, is it reduces the charge on that. And the way the analogy I use, it's like you have this ratty old couch in your living room, it's cluttering it up, and you want to get a new one, and you go out and you get the new one, but there's no room to put that in there until you remove this. That's why we tap on the negative. And I know I'm a big law of attraction person, so I've had people go, oh, I don't want to say the negative. My statement to that is, it's in us anyway. It's in your brain running the show, and the more you try and resist it and go, oh God, that's not there, the more it persists and the more it really entraps you. So when you tap and you're stating the negative, like, I'm so angry, I'm so upset, you're reducing that charge. They've actually done like MRIs. The science of this more and more is coming out, but where people before and after, they measure like the brain chemistry, and it's soothed actually when you tap. The way I look at it too is it changes the neural pathways in our brain. So say we have a neural pathway that's like, it's like, I'm not worth it. I'm not worthy. And that's a thought we've been thinking for a long time. It creates a neural pathway in the brain, like a canyon in our brain. So I always tell people, try and stop that thought. Let me know if you can hold back the tide, and we'll make a lot of money together. It's no different. You can't stop that thought, but you can interrupt it. And when you tap and you state that negative thought, you're actually interrupting it. So it's actually filling in the one neural pathway and starts to create a new one that has a more positive, thought to it. Okay.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think a lot of people have that thought, I'm not worthy. And one of the most difficult parts of navigating the aftermath of losing someone to suicide is that, you're not only intersecting grief over losing a loved one, but you're also intersecting, all of those thoughts that are in your head. And a suicide can, I think, magnify, those beliefs, which is why I think this is so interesting today. We're not just dealing with the grief of losing someone, we're dealing with the loss of connection and the sort of touching on that wound with the belief that I'm not worthy. So for somebody then who's dealing with emotions, how would you start? And I know this is something, tapping is probably something that you should really do with a trained practitioner, to get yourself going, and then you can kind of move into doing it on your own. Would you say that's right?
I absolutely agree with that, particularly I have somebody I tap with. I tap on myself all the time, but when I have something particularly emotionally charged, I like that assistance because they have a different perspective, and on top of which, it's like it allows you to go ahead and, feel and emote whatever you can, and somebody else is there to, hold that space for you and help you soothe it. So you don't have to feel these emotions and then be like, oh my God, what do I do with this? Absolutely get with somebody trained, and then you can learn to do that more on your own, for sure.
Okay, which I think is good. I mean, to have a tool. A lot of times I think people feel like the only way to get through this is I have to go to therapy, or I have to go to a support group, or these things where you're in contact with other people. And sometimes that's hard. And what I love about tapping for me, I worked through a lot of just the anxiety and some of these different issues that come up that surround suicide. And it was really nice just to have a tool where I could be on my own, and work through some of these things. So I like that end of it. You have on your website an interesting page that is called Forbidden Emotions. So I thought maybe we could talk about that, excuse me. And then you dealt with your mother's death, which was sort of, not a direct suicide, but in a roundabout way. So I'd love it if you would talk a little bit about that and how you use tapping in the aftermath of her death, just to kind of work through some of those emotions. Because I think forbidden emotions are big. We're never taught that it's okay to be outraged and to have anger and these different things. And, they're there, right? They're there for a reason.
Absolutely. It is really kind of a cornerstone of the work that I do, because I do feel like we have emotions that we tell ourselves they're not okay to feel. It's like if you feel it, get through that really quickly, or it's the emotions we try and deny and say, okay, don't spend too much time there, or that thing where I'm like, oh God, don't feel that. That means it's forbidden in my mind, so we don't want to go there. And that's why when some people have a resistance to tapping because you're stating the negative, it's with you're dealing with emotions that they think are forbidden and they don't want to feel, and they want to get through them as fast as they can, but you can't get through them unless you go into them and then through them. And emotions like that to me are like rage. When I had an eating disorder growing up, and when I stopped practicing it, the first emotion that came up was rage. I was terrified. Then I didn't have tapping and I didn't know what to do with it, so I took a baseball bat to a mattress. Don't recommend it. I torqued my neck a few times. I was that enraged. But once I discovered tapping, I was able to kind of, hit the rewind button and go back and tap through those emotions. And I have this really effective way to okay, I'm acknowledging that feeling, like I'm acknowledging the rage. And a big thing for me, and my mentor, and I love, she says this, my parents did the best they could, but it sucked for me. And when I heard that, I was like, oh God, she so gets me. And I thought that's how I felt. And to be honest with myself, when I got honest with myself, the emotion I thought was, I hate my parents. I really got honest. I said that, but from that vein, I was able to tap through that. Tap through the emotions of hatred that I felt. Like I felt ripped off. I couldn't believe the way they behaved. How could they do that to their daughters? Why didn't they care? But when I tapped through that, I literally reduced that. And now when I say my parents did the best they could, I'm totally congruent with it. I do believe they did. But I couldn't have gotten there had I not acknowledged this forbidden, I actually hate him. And I don't.
And that's, I think so, there's so many subsets of emotions underneath these other emotions, right? Hate, we can be in that state of hate, but what's really underneath that, and I've kind of gone through, similar things, is sadness. There's a tremendous sort of sadness underneath that, which is more representative of how you really feel, because, you feel ripped off. And even though, your parents did the best they can do and it wasn't the best for you, there is a sense of loss there. So I think, that's one of the really beautiful things for me has been discovering that ability to go beneath the anger and the rage and to get to the compassion and the sadness and be able to really feel that for what it truly is, rather than just living on that surface emotion and being angry. When you see those people out there, road rage and, just being crazy rude and that kind of thing, there's so much sadness beneath all that, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. And when I was tapping through that, that's such a great point, is when I was tapping through the hatred and I was feeling this intense anger. And then when I got through that, that's exactly what happened. I started to cry when I was tapping, and I realized how deeply saddened I felt that, as the little girl that I was and what I witnessed, and then really that they couldn't pull themselves to a better place. It was intense sadness. And through my sadness, then I realized I had absolute compassion for them. And from that, I was able to realize, oh, wow, my father, I always thought he was a jerk. And I was like, no, he had post-traumatic stress. He was a war veteran. Nobody knew what it was then. I was able to realize that, and I had called one of my sisters, and as soon as I said that to her, she started to cry, and it was really healing for her too. But again, it was like I had to deal with that. And that, you know, like you said, here's the surface thing. I hate him, and I tapped through that, got through the anger, and I'm like, gosh, I'm so sad about it.
And it's, you know, with suicide, I think there's these conflicting and very confusing emotions, right? You know, you have a loved one who's taken their life, and it can appear that they have abandoned you. And there's so many, it's just things that come up with that, because there's, you know, the anger that this has happened, and then, you know, the feelings that you hate them. But I think that's what's great about this, is that you can really go beneath that and discover what's really there, which I do think at the bottom of a lot of this stuff is just this immense and, you know, soul-searing sadness that that things aren't different, and, you know, learning to live with that and be more in touch with the compassion side of it is so much more empowering than living at the mercy of the anger of it, where you don't really understand what's going on.
Yeah, and that's very true for me with my mother. Even though my mother wasn't officially put down as suicide, it's totally what I believe happened. And just seeing the aftermath of how she died, and I mean, I believe she drank herself, and just to the point that she died. You know, her liver had failed and all that. And I had exactly that. Like when my sisters and I had to go into my mom's home and deal with like the wreck that was left behind. The first thing I was mad, you know, and then of course I felt guilty. And at that time, I was able to tap through this because I didn't have tapping at that time. And fortunately, when I had it, I was able to go back and tap through that. I felt so mad, and then I felt guilty that I was mad at her, and then I felt sad. And exactly like I said, I was so conflicted in what I was feeling, and having EFT allowed me to, as my mentor would say, unpack that bag and go, oh, okay, and really stop the confusion for me about the emotions and own each and every feeling that I had around that, and then set it free. And I could even talk about, like there was a time I couldn't even talk about what had happened and what my sister and I would do. If like, you know, having that strong emotion. Now it's a story. It was sad that it happened, but it's the emotional charge to it is gone, which to me is it sets us free.
I think that's really important. And I think, you know, when we don't explore these emotions, and particularly for people who have had a suicide in their family 20, 30 years ago, that's never been talked about, you are always, I think, at the risk of being triggered by, you know, maybe the way they speak about suicide, or, you know, some of these very visual things that kids will do, where they'll put their fingers to their head and, you know, in sort of a shooting motion. And I know that's happened a lot for my kids in high school, where, you know, people don't think that right next to them somebody's sitting there who's experienced this, but that can become a trigger for you. And if you don't understand why, and if you haven't explored the emotions with something like tapping, then I think you're at the mercy of it, really.
That's a really good point. Yeah, the emotions run you instead of you being able to. Oh, okay, I'm feeling this. I just got to get through it, and it's like taking a breath before the knee-jerk reaction happens. Now it's like, oh, I'm feeling this emotion. There's like a pause. Instead of, I'm into the emotion, and then circling the drain is what I call it.
Yeah, it is circling the drain. That's a good visual. So for someone then, I mean, there's so many different levels of this that I guess we could go to, but for somebody who, let's say, is dealing with, you know, super powerful emotions of feeling abandoned and, you know, feeling just that complete sense of despair, how would you start doing a tapping routine with them, so that, you know, just to bring some light and levity to that, and explore, you know, that kind of channel of emotion?
Yeah, I'll walk this through, like my own feeling of abandonment with my mom, because I definitely went through that, where I felt like, oh my God, she just checked out. Like she checked out, and, you know, I didn't even get to say goodbye. So how I would start that is literally like tapping and having a conversation with that person. So like with my mom, and we start on the karate chop. And as we tap, when we do the karate chop, it's what they call the setup statements. So the idea behind this is, you say, even though I have this emotion, whatever, even though I feel abandoned, I choose to love and accept myself anyway. And the reason we would do that is, we're letting the subconscious mind, I'm admitting that I have this issue and I accept this about myself. And I want to say sometimes people go, but I don't accept it. So you can say, I acknowledge I have this feeling, and you can ease into the acceptance piece. So if somebody's particularly resistant saying, well, I don't accept this, then I just say, can you acknowledge the feeling? And most times that's a great place to start. I acknowledge that I'm, I feel abandoned and I'm angry at her for leaving me. So we would start.
What is this, when you're tapping this here, what is that?
It's called the karate chop point.
And these have meridians that attach to?
Meridian points. Yeah, and it's all interconnected. They're absolutely interconnected. And I could tell you, I don't know why they started out here myself. I just know it's effective. And like my mentor says, I do skip this on occasion when I'm doing the rant tapping, but don't ever skip this. Because this is a critical point to say, I have this emotion and I accept it. Because we're not taught, I don't think, most of us to accept what we're feeling, unless it's like, oh, happy thoughts, happy thoughts. So if we're stating that, it just allows you, and they start here, and you do that 3 times, and then you would mirror my words. And then we go to what's called the reminder phrases. So we start at the eyebrow, and it's literally where your eyebrow begins. And I'm left-handed. I use my left hand. Some people do 2 hands. It doesn't matter. Some people like to cross over. It doesn't. They've found it's no more effective. So I just do 1 hand eyebrow, and then you'll see this, and I'll say it. Side of the eye is literally like right here with it, the top and the bottom of the eye come. Under the eye, the bone that goes along here, under the eye. Under the nose, the indentation, and the chin point. And that's literally the indentation. Collarbone, people can do open palm, it's where the knot of a man's tie would go. We've got our collarbones. I just tend to go out 2 inches to the side, and I tap here like right along and under the collarbone. And then these are always the ones I think are funny. If I do a workshop, I say, here's the goofy ones. Under the arm. So if you wear a bra, it's the bra strap for men. It's 4 inches below your armpit. And then top of the head. This is a critical point. I guess they all join together up here. So I just tap around in a circle. And I could tell you, I'm not like a detail person. You could look into all, the different, the eye piece and what they each mean. I just know it works. And that's where I come from. I'm like, I don't know what, it's just so super effective. And I found how much that's actually changed things for me. So that's why we would go through the different, and the reminder phrases is just like we're saying, we're reminding ourselves what it is that we're tapping on. And this is where you might bring up negative thoughts and negative statements. And when someone has resistance, I'd start there. Like, even though I can't say this, I don't want to say this. And I've had clients where they don't want to say a negative statement. So I tap on, I don't want to say it because I'm afraid I'll make it worse. I tap on that first, the belief that somehow I'm going to make it worse if I say it. The other thing I want to say about it, when you tap, strong emotions can spike. It's actually a really good thing. It means you've targeted that emotion and you're really spot on. And I tell people it's probably the last time you're going to feel that strongly about that particular thing. But to know that when people know that they can experience that and it's really a good thing because you're releasing something, then I find they're never afraid of it. And they know that, I can walk them through it and get them where they need to go. But I do like to say that strong emotions can come up, but it's a good thing. Right. It's a really good thing.
Right. And tapping, I did it in conjunction. I like presenting all these different ways of thinking for people, but it's certainly not something that is a fix-all, and it's not something that you would necessarily just think that, okay, I'm going to go tap and be okay. I mean, I would highly recommend, doing this, starting out in therapy and, and using this as an adjunct to everything else you're doing, because really we have to come at this from so many different angles, whether it's meditation or tapping or breath work. I think just another tool in the toolbox, really, right?
Absolutely. I'm a firm believer. Like, I do tapping on everything, but I do meditation. I do other techniques too. Tapping's definitely my primary. It's the thing I've had the most success with myself and with my clients. But whatever it is for you that feels, resonant with you, absolutely, you have to follow your heart about that, and, feel like this is really the thing, or this, like you said, it's a tool in the toolbox that I can plug. What I love about it is you can do it really, especially once you learn it for yourself, anytime, anywhere. I mean, road rage, if you're in the car and you're feeling angry, I've done it.
I frequently, when I'm in the car, and I'm always looking around trying to make sure that I'm not being, watched by anybody. But I think just so people know too, that tapping has been used effectively for war veterans with PTSD, and then also I know there's a group that has done a lot of work in Rwanda with the genocide victims, and those are really powerful experiences, and so it obviously is working and having effect for people, right? I mean, there's a
oh, absolutely. I can tell you, my mentor, when I hooked up with her, she's what I would call a very high-powered therapist in New York City, and she found tapping and was kind of like, okay, I'll try it. And she's an EFT master, and she said, I'll try it. And then she couldn't believe how quickly people were getting results over, like, really more so than with the talk therapy they were doing. They were still doing that, but she was like, wow, they were just making it in leaps and strides. And she's always said, if you show me something that works better, I'll do it. But and I found, like, all the different things I've tried of this, it's been so effective for me. But again, everybody's got to find the thing that resonates with them, that they feel is working, and have a conglomeration of things that can help you.
Right. She must be related to my therapist, because that's kind of exactly she was Jungian trained and all those things, and then, discovered these different things, and particularly tapping, and found that it was very effective in helping people, just leaps and bounds through some of these things. So, and really the idea of it for the people who are watching this is, it's creating these pockets of relief. To me, suicide is such a dark energy. There's just such a heaviness and a density to it. So the tapping, I think, is so wonderful, because it really does, I say poke holes in the darkness, because there, I don't know with suicide, it's not like you can ever really lift that darkness entirely, certainly in the beginning especially, but just, creating these pockets of relief and these spaces where you can find comfort and feel like you're at home in your body. That's, I think, one of the biggest pieces that I found with tapping, and why I really wanted to talk about it here, is giving people, that sense of just relief, because sometimes it's just hard to find relief from, from the heaviness of it. So then, phrases that people might be saying about being, feeling that abandonment and things when they're doing this tapping routine, just to familiarize people with what that might look like. What would you say? Because it can be quite uncomfortable. I mean, there's sort of, you're bringing something in that you are really pushing away, and particularly with, somebody who already feels unworthy and has that belief in their head. And then to be sitting there sort of saying, I've been abandoned, and these things is a conflict of interest. So how would that look?
Yeah, how I would do it is karate chop, and if you want to be my mirror, you can tap along and follow me. So even though I feel abandoned.
Even though I feel abandoned.
Why did they do this?
Why did they do this?
Why did they leave me like this?
Why did they leave me like this?
So many unanswered questions.
So many unanswered questions.
I don't understand it.
I don't understand it.
I can't wrap my mind around it.
I can't wrap my mind around it.
I choose to acknowledge that I feel this way.
I choose to acknowledge that I feel this way.
Even though I'm so confused.
Even though I'm so confused.
I feel angry and sad.
I feel angry and sad.
Why'd you do it?
Why did you do it?
Why'd you abandon me?
Why did you abandon me?
Did I do something wrong?
Did I do something wrong?
I choose to acknowledge my feelings now.
I choose to acknowledge my feelings now.
Even though I am so confused.
Even though I'm so confused.
I feel so abandoned.
I feel so abandoned.
And I'm angry and sad.
And I'm really angry and sad.
I don't understand this.
I don't understand this.
It's so heavy and dark for me.
It's so heavy and dark for me.
How could you do that?
How could you do that?
I choose to accept that I feel this way.
I choose to accept that I feel this way.
And we go to the eyebrow. I feel so sad.
I feel so sad.
I feel so abandoned.
I feel so abandoned.
I'm trying to understand this.
I'm trying to understand this.
But I can't make sense of it.
But I can't make sense of it.
I am so conflicted.
I'm so conflicted.
I'm angry at you.
I'm angry at you.
And I feel guilty about that.
And I feel guilty about that.
Why did you leave?
Why did you leave?
Why did you have to do that?
Why did you have to do that?
Why did you abandon me?
Why did you abandon me?
I don't understand.
I don't understand.
I feel so sad about this.
I feel so sad about this.
I want to understand this.
And I want to understand this.
But my emotions are so high right now.
But my emotions are so high right now.
I'm trying to grasp this.
I'm trying to grasp this.
But I'm just not there yet.
But I'm just not there yet.
And take a breath. That's a lot of really kind of what went on for me, you know, with the thing with my mom. Because I did feel, I was angry, I was sad, I was confused, I felt guilty. I was like, what happened, you know? And that's how I would go about doing that. And obviously it can be a very potent session. You know, it can draw up emotions. And I trust the tapping. I've never, it's like, it hasn't failed me yet. I know it can get you to a better place where it really does. That heaviness, that darkness starts to feel lighter. And even like I said, I couldn't even have talked about stuff with my mom without, I call it the lower lip quiver. I was so, and now I could talk about it, and I do feel like that it's not as heavy. It's just, it's what happened, you know, it's what went on, but I feel so much more grounded and different, and I don't feel confused now. It's like I kind of get it, if that makes sense.
Well, it does make a lot of sense. And I think with time frame, I mean, this is something that, you know, I mean, my husband took his life 5 years ago almost. And, you know, there's issues are still coming up because we are, I think humans, you know, we have a tendency to want to take the magic pill or just give me 5 easy steps, you know, just make this pain stop. But we're like rocks with strata, right? We have these just layers and layers and layers that, you know, start when we're born. And so we're just, with tapping, I think, peeling back the layers and peeling back, and where, you know, one session might be about your emotions around abandonment, and maybe that lessens, and then it becomes more about the anger, you know, which then moves into the sadness. And, you know, so it sort of just keeps moving and shifting, doesn't it? Where it
really does. Yeah. And I call it, there's a thing called follow the process. That's how I do it. It's whatever comes up, and it can spill into something else. Like you can start over here and go, how do I end up over here? But I believe the mind feeds the information that it's ready to deal with. So if it might seem completely unrelated, like this, we started here and this is coming up, but it's significant. There's a thing in EFT called linking, where memories get linked together, so the emotional experience feels similar. You can have vastly different experiences, but the feeling experience is the same. So that's why sometimes you can start here and go, wait, how's this related to that? But it is, because if it's coming up, it's part of it. And I've had that experience many times myself. I'm like, how did I end up over here? But when I've released it, it's just been so many, that particular thing I was tapping on shifted. Right.
Well, and it's so true, isn't it, that, you know, most of the time, the argument that we're having right here today, you know, about the toothpaste, the tube of toothpaste that keeps getting left out, or the door that isn't getting closed, or, you know, whatever it is that seems very trivial, really has roots that go way, way deep into, you know, an incident that might have happened when we were, you know, 3 or 4 that, you know, never got resolved, and then just kept getting built upon and built upon. I mean, I think that's what's so interesting about doing this work, is that you just start to understand, you know, how complex we are, and that, you know, we human beings really should come, I think, with an owner's manual. I mean, we spend more time, you know, researching our latest TV or, you know, smartphone that we're going to buy, as opposed to really spending time figuring out why we behave the way we do. And there are very good reasons, you know, aren't there? I mean, really, why we behave the way we do. And I know my son, we had an interaction a few years ago with my dad, and he got very upset, and it was just, it was just a situation where he felt helpless. There was this, my dad wanted one thing to happen, and he was trying to explain to him that, he didn't want to move these crystals because they would disintegrate, basically. And my dad just didn't understand the importance of this, and it ended up, this box got moved, the crystals all fell apart. And when I was explaining to my son, because he was so upset, that this was representative of all these other incidents that had happened in his life, particularly when he lost his father, that made him feel, just utterly helpless and lack of control. And, really, and he really got it. It's like the string of Christmas lights that just goes all the way back to the outlet where it originated from. And every time we have an experience that's similar to that, it just lights the whole thing up again. And that's what I love about EFT, is that you can just kind of start going back and following that strand into the layer where it exists.
Yeah, and that's a really good point too, Dianna, because what I've found too is I'll still have an emotional charge about something, but I notice the progression of how it's getting better. Like I used to joke and say I'm a nuclear reactor, something would happen, but it makes sense. I was raised by a father who had post-traumatic stress. I was always on alert, and then an alcoholic mom. It's like I was always in PTSD myself. But what I've noticed is the reaction time is shifted. Like I might have that reaction, but I can catch it. Like, oh, and I notice it's not as strong. It doesn't last as long. I can get through it. I used to, like, if I would have a fight with my husband, I called it a 3-day emotional hangover. I literally, I don't go into that anymore. I might be upset about something, but if it's 30 minutes or 3 hours would be the length of it. That's how I've seen it change. It's not that we're never going to have these emotions again or never have these feelings, but they're manageable. They become so much more manageable. And I've learned to embrace my emotions, and even my rage and all the things that, that's forbidden. Don't be rageful. And it's actually become, it can be a productive thing. There's a good side to all of that. Really, in truth, there's no bad emotion. It's just an emotion. It's ultimately when an emotion's on the, I've heard this, and I believe it's true, it takes 90 seconds to move through us. But when it gets blocked, it sticks with us. So when we allow for them, they move through, and it's like, oh, okay, it went on. Whereas before it was like frozen. Right. It made sense. So I find that's shifting, and it's like all starting to settle down more and more and more.
Well, it's a healthier response. I think, there's, and I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to go into too deep into, all of these things. But, apparently this amygdala that we have in our brain is really wired for survival. And all it's asking, right, is, am I safe? Is this safe? Am I safe? And there is something called a hijack where, when you get triggered and you have that emotional response, your body literally is hijacked by the amygdala, and it is, a hormonal cascade and the chemicals and the adrenaline, which are not healthy, and, in the long run. And I think some people are literally triggered 24/7 because they just haven't learned to sort of interrupt the process, which is exactly what you can do with this tapping. And, speaking of this, you had mentioned something to me when we were talking before about the rant tapping, which I think is a really interesting, for people in this situation. Ranting is okay. Feeling, completely pissed off is okay. And I think that's a really healthy thing to do so that you can kind of reclaim your space in this. But talk about the rant a little bit and what that looks like.
Yeah, it's a term in EFT, and it's and I use it in a particular way that I love it, and I find it's really effective. It really allowed me, being raised around a father who was raging all the time. I had a lot of rage in me. I mean, I still do. I see it. But I was like, oh, wow, now I have an effective way to rant it out. And I think it's really effective when you're feeling anger towards someone. And particularly so there's anger, and usually there's guilt around it. Like, oh, I shouldn't feel that way about that person. But when I'm working with a client, I say, let's just try and put everything that feels inappropriate on the shelf. You can pick it up at any moment. If you could say anything to this person, they're not going to hear it. You're not walking up to them and saying this, but you get to have your say. And the way I put this is, I believe it gives that inner child in us that never got a say a chance to have their say.
I love that. Yeah,
it's like, yeah.
Yeah.
It really, and I think when we look at it that way, like we're reprogramming the inner child, we're giving that part of us this say. I find clients are more like, yeah, let's do this. And so the idea of Rant Tapping, so one time I don't do the karate chop, is you would just start on the like eyebrow, and you would say, like, you get to say whatever you want to say to this person. Like, don't worry about being appropriate, but you have to tap. That's the caveat. And again, I'm not suggesting that you walk up to someone and rant it out with them. But what I have found is when I'm upset with someone and I tap through it, it just totally simmers me down. There it is, it cools down my fight or flight response. And then I can actually have say someone that's alive, I can have a conversation where I'm not so charged. So for like in the instance of this with someone that's passed on, I had to do this with my mom, and I did it with my dad, and I tapped it out. Like I was saying things like, oh, I hate you. I hate what you did to my sisters, and I can't believe it. Why couldn't you put us first? It's my little kid she's allowed to throw a temper tantrum and say all the stuff that she felt growing up. It's because that's how that little kid in me felt. Like, you're not paying attention to me. And I ranted it out. Like, leave me alone. Get out of my face. Stop fighting in front of me. Stop breaking things. Stop flipping the dinner table over. Like that.
Wow. I
was able to allow her to get it out. I swear it was so liberating. It just set me free. And I've seen it with so many clients who are like, God, I feel so much better. Like, I got this out. The caveat is you got to tap.
Yeah. I love that. I love the idea of the inner child, because I think, particularly with suicide loss, that really, it just harkens back to that little kid who was, didn't feel safe. And how do we create that safety, and how do we, reclaim that identity for ourselves? And I think a lot of people just go through the rest of their life with that, kind of gaping wound, as opposed to this where you can take it and really turn it into something positive. So I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was really helpful. A therapist that I saw once said this, and that I've seen when I've tapped, it was like, oh, your child's been activated. And I love that. So when I would have that high emotional charge and go into like panic, I was like, oh, my kid's running the show. And I cannot tell you how much that's helped me to separate that from myself. Because before I would have an emotion, I just literally, like, the verbiage was, I'm a mess. I can't get through this. And now I'm like, oh, my kid's activated.
Right.
So it allows me to sort of take a step back and like reparent this child in me, and not be like, oh, that's all of who I am. Like, I'm a mess. No, my kid's activated. Yeah,
it's a little less threatening, isn't it? For some, particularly, in this where you have the push-pull of, I shouldn't feel that way, but I feel this way. If you hand it over to, just seeing it as this is your inner child that has been, deeply wounded. I mean, it's a very wounding experience. I don't know that there's really anything else like surviving the aftermath of suicide, because there's just so much conflict involved with it. But handing it over to the inner child and letting them work out their issues in this way, I think is great. Because as children, of course, you and I grew up in the era of, be nice, stop that behavior. You weren't allowed to get mad. You weren't allowed to ever say, dirty word. And I had this practice with my children when they were in elementary school. They would get in the car and I would notice that they would be very amped up just from the day. So we came up with this sort of ritual where they were allowed, when they got in the car for the 10-minute or so drive to home, that they could say anything they wanted to, any word, and so they were hysterical because, of course, children, I don't know if it's true anymore because these kids seem to be so ahead of their years, but it was a really big deal to say, a swear word and stuff. And so I gave them full range to be able to say, so-and-so, and they were, the teachers, such a bitch, and gosh, she's so mean, and this and that, and, and literally we would, get home and they would get out of the car, and they were just like different people. It was just that sort of permission, number one, to just let that out and rant. And they never, it wasn't like they got out of the car, they never tried to abuse it. They knew that that's where they could, use all those words. And I think it really helped them. And so this is almost like giving your inner child permission, which is a huge piece. I think, permission is something that is really big around the aftermath of suicide, because it's very difficult, because you do feel so guilty. But just with this, giving yourself permission to let that little child, go wild and heal.
Yeah, I love that. That's such an awesome thing that you did with them and do with them. It's like, it's totally, you think about So they're not building up and accumulating these
Right.
feelings. They're allowed to express them and move on from them. I am a firm believer if we could express these forbidden emotions and do it in a healthy way, there'd be a lot less road rage, there'd be a lot less domestic violence, there'd be a lot less suicide, because we're owning it. And it's like, then we learn to go, there's nothing wrong with what I'm feeling.
Right.
There's nothing bad about it. It's just a feeling, and it will move through me. I think it's critical. And I mean, I love that you've done that with your kids, because I mean, that's parenting. That's allowing, you're already setting these children on a path that is so different than obviously you and I had. It makes sense when I stopped, you know, abusing food, that I got rageful because I kept stuffing. So that's great. I love it.
Yeah, it was very effective. I mean, they're now 17, 20, and 21, so you know, this was a while back, but it really was, I mean, the difference in, you know, from the time they got in the car to the time that we got home was remarkable, just, you know, in that. And I think, you know, we're also afraid of these feelings that we have. There's just such fear around being able to really truly express what's in your heart. And because we don't learn how to express it in an open way with integrity and authenticity, we tend to express it from a place of feeling attacked, you know, kind of that defensive thing. So things, and I know for myself, you know, would always come out wrong. I'd say things and it was like, oh, that's not what I really meant. What I really meant was, you know, and at the bottom of it, I think most of these interactions and these hurts that we have, it's like, gosh, you really hurt my feelings. That really hurt. But it comes out as, you know, you're this, you did this to me. And what it really is, you know, the honest part of it is just that I just feel so alone. I feel so hurt. And, you know, being in the aftermath of suicide, my God, these feelings just, they're huge. They're so big. And it's like, you know, having a magnifying glass on them. And so I love that tapping can really give people a way to go through them without so much of the triggers and, you know, and just being able to manage it.
Oh, absolutely. And you can tap on the guilt that you feel about saying something, which is great, because then you can reduce the guilt and then allow yourself to say it. It is, I have just found it to be so liberating, life-changing.
And how long do you think, I mean, when you use tapping, for somebody who's working through a really particularly big thing like the loss of someone to suicide, you know, people always, you know, want to know, how long is this going to take? How soon am I going to feel better? And, you know, that kind of thing. I mean, is it just something to plan on, you know, incorporating into the rest of your life and have it, you know, like we talked about, these layers coming back before? Like for someone who wanted to tap, you do a session. How long is a session? Do you do it every day? Do you do it once a week? How does that sort of present?
How I work it, and my work is, when I first start working with somebody, I do want to do a session once a week just to get the momentum going. I find it's really effective, particularly if there's a sticky issue. Now, sometimes if it's something super sticky, somebody will opt to do it twice a week, but for sure once a week. And then I'll tell people some tapping to do in between. And sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. But I'm always like, well, don't judge yourself for it. You'll do it when you're ready. But the more you start to, I think once a week, and there's 60 minutes, it's really effective. And then as they start moving through some of the heavier stuff, then they can keep tapping more on their own. The people that I find make the most progress the quickest, and everyone is different, so I would never want to give a pat answer and say, well, in 3 sessions you'll be done with it. I don't think that's fair to anybody. I won't typically do 1 session with anybody. I just don't think it's doing them a service.
Right.
I tend to like to work with people for like 3 months at least, because I feel like that's a reasonable amount of time to dive in, and I find people want to work longer, just depending on the person. But once a week is great, especially to get started. And then sometimes after those, you know, there's really a reduction in what the primary thing that they're coming to you for is, then that can be spread out from there. I definitely think it's something to keep in the toolbox. I tap every day. I mean, I have the good fortune, I'm working with people every day, so I'm tapping
all the time.
Benefits. I'm out hiking, I'm tapping with my dog. If something comes up, it's just such an easy, hands-on, you know, tool that is free when you're doing it by yourself, that you can do in between to really help. And it just depends, like each person I take individually, and some people, you know, take a little more time with something, and I'm totally honorable to that. And everyone, again, everybody's different, so people find their own way with it.
Right. Yeah, I love that. And you know, good good to work with somebody in the beginning so you kind of get the scripts and you can figure out, where these different things are leading to, and uncover kind of what the real issues are. So I think that's great for people.
I've worked with people for over a year. I have a coach that I work with once a week. I want to keep that up. I just believe in the maintenance and keeps me on page and, helps me. So that's just how I do it.
Well, it's kind of, it's mental hygiene, really. We get up every day and we brush our teeth and we drink water and, we hopefully are eating well. But I think a lot of us don't really pay a lot of attention to the mental landscape that we have, which is really important, particularly when you're going through a traumatic, loss and trying to get the lay of the land. But I think mental hygiene is really important. And to me, tapping and meditation and all these modalities are just really part of that, part of kind of keeping the energy moving, but also part of, this whole reprogramming now with neuroplasticity and everything out there. There's just so many great opportunities to use your mind in a way that is for your benefit rather than letting it, run your life and have all the old scripts playing over and over again.
Yeah, and it really is, to your point about mental hygiene and daily, is I think especially in dealing with the aftermath of suicide, as you go throughout the day, and be it meditation or whatever. So for me with the tapping, if something were to come up around that, then I go, oh, I can just do a quick tapping round. It doesn't have to be I got to sit down even for 20 minutes, but oh wow, I just noticed I'm triggered, I'm feeling this sadness again. That in and of itself is a pattern interrupt. And I know Bruce Lipton, the cell biologist, said the best thing you can do is just keep interrupting. And again, it doesn't have to be, oh, I got to sit down and do this for a half hour, but oh, I can just do a quick interruption, because that keeps shifting the neural pathway.
Yeah, so important. I think that interruption thing is huge, especially in this, dealing with this whole issue, because it can just become a very well-grooved record that spins around with the same messages, going on and on. So that interruption is huge, and for me, it's made a big difference too. So,
yeah.
I'm curious. I have this theory on suicide, on the epidemic, that it's asking us really to kind of look at the way we're living our lives and interacting with each other, because there's just such a tremendous loss of connection in the world today with ourselves, and I think with the people around us. So with that in mind, how would you say that EFT can help people really reconnect with themselves? Because I think that's so important in this experience, to reclaim yourself in the chaos and say, this happened to me, but I'm going to move through this, in a certain way. And how do you think EFT can help somebody do that?
Well, I know how it's worked for me and with different clients is I was living life in survival mode. That's pretty much what I was doing. And to me, when you're living in survival mode, the ability to really know yourself and your inner workings is slim. There's a man named Blair Singer, and I love this. He always said, when emotions are high, intelligence is low. So when our emotions are like running the show, we're just trying to survive it. What I've found with EFT is as those emotions calm down, like I really feel like I have such a sense of myself now. I know more of who I am. When I think about even 4 or 5 years ago, what I would call my resting thoughts, oh my God, they were so negative. I remember vividly one day, and I'm like, oh my God, that is scary up there. And now what I notice is they're infinitely more positive. I've even noticed what I would call new neural pathways, where they're coming into play, and I have more positive thoughts, and it's also allowed me to claim my feelings. I couldn't have named feelings. Like I knew rage and anger, but now that I can go, wow, like you said, I'm really hurt. And I think that's given me a sense of myself, because knowing my emotions is knowing myself and learning who I am and learning, the distinctions. I like this, I don't like that. I'm out of survival mode, so then I can actually go in and find who I am. And absolutely meditation. I love meditation. It's a huge way to get in touch with ourselves. And the key to that, too, to me, is getting back in touch with that intuition, that higher self, whatever you want to call it, that is our best guide. It's our inner guru. We don't need to find the guru out there. We can find people that can assist us getting us where we want to go, but we get back to listening to ourselves, what's right for me. I've seen that myself. I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. Whereas before, I would have been saying yes when the truth is it was a no for me.
Right.
And that's how I see it really helps us get into ourselves and trust our intuition and follow that guidance.
And just feel at home, right? Feel at home in your own skin,
Yeah.
which I can relate to, with you. Just before all of this happened to me, I didn't know myself at all. I didn't feel comfortable in my skin and really had kind of abandoned myself, for the sake of fitting in and being part of a tribe and all those things that we do as humans. And I think that's the importance, particularly after a tragedy like this, is to really find your way home to yourself so that you can do the things that are serving you best and, will help you go towards the future. And also, if you have children, be able to lead and guide them in the same way. So,
yeah,
very cool. So if people want to get in touch with you, Marti, where can they find you? What's your website and what's the best way to contact you?
My website's my name. It's www.marti with an I, M-A-R-T-I, Murphy, M-U-R-P-H-Y.com. And then my email is info@martimurphy.com.
Okay. And I know you have some great tapping scripts on your site too that they can download.
Yeah, there's tapping scripts, and in the resources page, there's newsletters, which is videos of me tapping. So you can, if you're like, oh, I don't know how to tap or what to tap on, I highly recommend watch videos. They're great because it's great to have somebody mirroring it, and then you don't have to figure out what to say.
Mm-hmm.
So
okay, very cool. Well, thank you so much for spending time with me. I really appreciate it. I think this was great information, and I hope everyone enjoyed it. If you want to find Marti, go to her website, and we will look forward to seeing you again on the next interview. Thanks so much for joining us. Bye, Marti.
bye.
Thanks.
Thanks.